At 94 years old, Clint Eastwood did something no one thought imaginable. He directed his 42nd film. His best effort in 10 years, according to critics. But behind the scenes, music, he was struggling with a loss that affected everything. His Snorts longtime partner had recently passed away without warning. His son later, Music, claimed he was doing okay, but the words felt guarded. Snorts, then came a bizarre interview that Eastwood himself branded utterly false. Something deeper was happening. And when the truth finally came out, it explained why this might be the last time we ever hear from him. Clint Snorts Eastwood joined the world on May 31, 1930 in San Francisco. His size was the first thing that people noticed. He weighed 11 pounds 6 So the nurses called him Samson before anyone even filled out the papers. His parents, Clinton Sr. and Ruth, carried him home to Oakland's Lake Merritt area, seeking to construct a solid life even while the Great Depression kept changing their plans. His father worked as a bond salesman at first and eventually found a long-term path with Georgia Pacific, while his mother stayed home till the children grew older and then joined IBM as a clerk. As the economy faltered in the 1930s, Clint's family, who only had one sibling, his younger sister Jean, moved from town to town in search of better possibilities. These early shifts felt like survival at the time. Yet years later, that story would be warped in a way no one predicted. Snorts, Clint talked about poverty and sounded like someone who had experienced difficulty for many years. He leaned into the narrative of a hard childhood influenced by the Depression. Then that perception was completely shattered by Music, Sandra Lockcatch, who lived with him from 1975 to 1989. She described how the family eventually made Piedmont, one of Northern California's wealthiest communities, their home in 1940. They had a private swimming pool, a country club membership, and enough money for every family member to drive their own car. In 1940s America, relatively few households owned a car, much less multiple ones, so it was shocking. They were never impoverished, Lacka stated rather bluntly. That truth impacted the fiction Clint loved to tell about himself. However, the juxtaposition between adolescent affluence and early uncertainty, Music, subtly influenced his trajectory in life. Even with the comfort around him, Clint rebelled against school every step of the way. Almost nothing else mattered to him but automobiles, women, and beer. He was held back one full grade in middle school. When he started Piedmont High in January 1945, the restlessness only grew stronger. He was expelled within a year for a variety of careless actions, such as writing an offensive message on the scoreboard, setting someone on fire in effigy, and riding his bicycle across a wet sports field till he damaged the grass. He had a ducktail haircut, long limbs, leather coats, and was already 6 feet 4 inches tall. He transferred to Music, Oakland Technical High School and finally graduated on February 2, 1949. Through all of it, the only subjects that actually attracted his attention were music and mechanical work. The year 1949 became even more defining when his parents and sister packed up and moved to Seattle. At the age of 18, Clint chose freedom above comfort and stayed behind in California. While the rest of the family settled into a new life in the Pacific Northwest, he found jobs wherever he could. He worked as a firefighter, a golf caddy, and a lifeguard, floating through Oakland, Music, and adjacent communities with no obvious direction, but lots of determination. That choice to remain in California positioned him exactly where he needed to be for what was ahead. Only 2 years later, in 1951, he was drafted into the Army and transferred to Fort Ord as a swimming teacher. A Universal Studios employee observed him on the base, and that moment, almost accidental, became Snorts, the first spark of a Hollywood future. Even though the Eastwood family had money by the time they reached Piedmont, the memories of all the past relocations stuck with Clint. He adopted his father's focused approach to work. He learned from Ruth's transformation from homemaker to corporate clerk. He understood how easily stability might evaporate and how hard someone had to work to keep it stable. These subtle teachings influenced his belief in efficiency even before he stepped onto a film set. Later, when he became recognized for filming films fast, discreetly, and under budget, he linked that approach to the values acquired during the Depression years. Even though he never experienced the hardship he publicly talked about, things changed once more on September 30, 1951, when Clint, then 21, boarded a Navy plane after seeing his sweetheart in Seattle. In order to receive a complimentary military passenger ride, he had worn his uniform, something that many troops at the time did. After departing Sand Point Naval Air Station, the Douglas AD-1Q Skyraider set off for California. What began as a regular lift evolved into a fight for survival. Clint was served stateside during the Korean War, working as a swimming teacher at Fort where he had never seen action. Yet on that evening, his near-death experience came, music, from the sky rather than the battlefield. At 18:25 hours, everything inside the airplane began to fail. The radio system died, cutting off all communication. Moments later, the oxygen system failed, too, leaving the pilot and passenger gasping as the altitude crushed down on them. The navigation system went dark, so the pilot had no working equipment to assist him while dense fog drifted across the coast. Even the communication between the cockpit and Clint's seat became silent. The fuel ran out more quickly than anticipated, and the companion aircraft vanished into the cloud. The pilot was forced to ditch the Skyraider into the chilly Pacific about 2 miles offshore because the tanks were empty by the time the aircraft arrived in the waters off Point Reyes. The landing was harsh but upright, giving Clint and Lieutenant Francis Anderson just enough time to flee into the frigid water. They inflated 2 rafts and paddled away from the sinking airplane, which plunged around 150 feet into the ocean and vanished. Strong currents drove the men away until Clint was alone, pushing his way toward a small lighthouse light on the far beach. He swam and rowed through frigid water for nearly an hour, his arms burning, his body shivering. But going forward was the only choice. After arriving on land, he roamed around until he came upon the Point Reyes RCA radio station. The station operator later reported Clint looked bewildered and barely able to communicate. Years later, when Captain Chesley Sullenberger hesitated to authorize a movie about his 2009 Hudson River landing, everything changed the instant he learned that Clint Eastwood had survived a similar disaster in 1951. That mutual understanding broke down Sullenberger's reluctance. Because of their relationship, Clint was able to contribute an authenticity, music, to the 2016 movie Sully that only someone who had experienced frigid water encircling their body could comprehend. Clint's path was likewise changed by the crash in unexpected ways. Before the event, he was planned for foreign deployment to Korea. By the time the music paperwork cleared, there were delays due to the investigation and subsequent medical exams. His deployment had been cancelled. Many young troops sent that year never returned home. Instead, Clint remained at Fort or as a lifeguard for the duration of his service, the same expertise that kept him alive in the Pacific. His awareness of danger and mortality was increased by that event, which he later expressed in his acting and directing roles. After leaving the service, he went into Hollywood with no map and very little money. He dug, snorts, swimming pools. He was a trash truck driver. He tried LA City College, but left to focus on performing. His snorts appearances in movies like 1955's Revenge of the Creature were brief and uncredited. Then on October 23, 1955, Universal Studios dropped him totally. His noticeable Adam's apple, halting speech, and chipped teeth made him look strange, according to executives, snorts. For the snorts next 3 years, he floated through the industry wondering if the door to acting would ever reopen. When he was cast as Rowdy Yates in Rawhide by Charles Marcus Warren in 1958, everything changed. The show aired on January 9, 1959 and became Clint's first stable employment. At the outset, he made roughly $700 to $750 per episode. Not much by today's standards, but sufficient to alleviate his ongoing financial strain. Millions of spectators welcomed him into their living rooms every Friday night. His pay increased to almost $100,000 annually as the seasons changed. But he still felt boxed in. Rowdy Yates was honest, enthusiastic, and devoted. Yet, snorts, Clint knew there was more inside him waiting for a role that would let him explore it. By 1965, snorts and music, Rawhide began to unravel. To save money that summer, CBS let go of Eric Fleming and a number of cast musicians. Fleming, snorts, claimed in public that he was making $220,000 that year, but some thought he was lying. When Clint took over as Trail's new boss, CBS gave him no pay increase. He was unhappy and felt the show had lost its rhythm. Then the network made a hazardous scheduling move, relocating Rawhide to Tuesday nights where it faced heavy competition. In December 1965, CBS canceled the show with Clint in the starring role after just 13 episodes. Fleming died the next year on September 28, 1966, while filming in Peru, throwing a melancholy shadow over the show's history. What makes this era even more extraordinary is that Clint almost missed the opportunity that would change his life. During a break, music, between seasons 6 and 7, Italian filmmaker Sergio Leone requested him for a tiny western filming in Spain. Clint wasn't especially excited. He was focused on golf and didn't see much potential in the offer. Just $15,000 was paid. The director didn't speak English. The movie appeared to be more of an experiment than a career decision. He took the job mostly out of curiosity. He had no idea how close this moment came to slipping away. Leone had, music, first asked Eric Fleming, who rejected because he earned significantly more on Rawhide. Charles Bronson read the script and rejected it as the worst he had ever seen. Richard Harrison also declined, but he recognized Clint from a low-budget western and recommended him. That single suggestion transformed Hollywood history. A clutch of dollars was recorded on a modest $200,000 budget near Madrid. Crew members were unpaid at times and even removed the set's windows in protest. The was released on September 12, 1964 in Italy and blew past every estimate, grossing $19.9 million worldwide. No one told Clint any of this until weeks later. He didn't realize that a movie he approached casually had just transformed his career. Success, music, grew swiftly. The second film, for a few dollars extra, cost $600,000 to make and earned $15 million. Clint's income jumped to $50,000. When Leone prepared the final film, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Clint hesitated again. The director nearly replaced him with Bronson, music, but Clint returned after being paid $250,000 plus 10% of the Western box office, music, revenues. That picture made $38.9 million globally. And by the time, music, the trilogy ended, he had become an international celebrity. Clint likes to dwell, music, on how easy he could have missed all of it. If he had chosen golf over that vacation to Spain, he might have stayed a TV side character, earning $700 an episode. Snorts, Rawhide was never able to introduce him to audiences the way the anonymous man did. Snorts, his silence, his stillness, and the keen stare in his eyes were his characteristics. A style that inspired decades of movies. By 1968, the stats told everything. He earned $1 million for Coogan's Bluff, $750,000 for Where Eagles Dare, and $400,000 plus a quarter of the total revenues for Hangam High. He went from making $15,000 to over $1 million a movie in just 4 years. One of the most spectacular wage hikes Hollywood has ever seen. Dirty Harry premiered in theaters on December 23, 1971, and the timing alone made folks anxious. Northern California was still living under the shadow of the Zodiac Killer, a real murderer who had shot, stabbed, and scared, music, the region between 1968 and 1969. At least 5 persons were verified killed, with the final known death happening on October 11, 1969, when cab driver Paul, music, Stein was shot in San Francisco. Police could only confirm 5 deaths, but the Zodiac had filled newspapers with insulting messages boasting about killing 37. By late 1971, investigators had nothing. No arrest, music, no suspect, no name. Suddenly, viewers were seated in dimly lit theaters while a fake police officer pursued Scorpio, a murderer who was obviously modeled by Zodiac, complete with sporadic acts of violence and derisive remarks to the media. The chill came from knowing that on film, justice was speedy, Snorts, yet in real life, the city had been left impotent just 2 years before. That discomfort went straight into the streets. When the 1971 Academy Awards rolled around, protesters, Snorts, gathered outside waving posters that said, "Dirty Harry is a rotten pig." The country was already raw. The Kent State shootings were only a year old. Vietnam was ripping the nation apart, and trust in law enforcement was eroding as stories of entrapment, abuse, and corruption dominated the press. Clint Eastwood was openly shouted at during engagements in the Bay Area, especially by feminist groups. Critics argued the film promoted police brutality at the worst conceivable moment. The fury was not only about one movie. It was connected to the still-raging dispute over the 1966 Miranda v. Arizona ruling, which required police to warn detainees of their rights. Conservatives claimed it shielded criminals. Civil rights activists feared unbridled power. Dirty Harry landed squarely in the heart of that crash. The word fascist accompanied the film almost immediately. Much of it centered, music, on the incident at Kezar Stadium where Harry shoots Scorpio in the leg and grinds, music, his foot into the wound to force information about a kidnapped female. Eastwood never, music, denied that the picture breached Miranda rules. Harry conducts a warrantless search. He tortures without reading, music, rights. He does not, however, prevail in the story. When the district attorney argues, music, that Scorpio must be released because the evidence was improperly obtained, Harry fires back with a simple inquiry regarding the girl's rights. The response is harsh. The district attorney says his office speaks for her. If Harry would let them. In the end, the system rejects Harry altogether. The killer walks. Harry throws away his badge. The film finishes not with success, but with hatred against both chaos and the law itself. In 1971, the response to the question of who speaks for victims was awkward, so it struck a chord. Victims' rights groups barely existed. The National Organization for Victim Assistance would not be created until 1975. The first rape crisis center in the United States opened the same year Dirty Harry premiered. Miranda v. Arizona was still fresh, ruled by a narrow 5-4 vote in 1966, and Congress had already tried and failed to weaken it with a 1968 statute. When Scorpio demanded his $200,000 ransom while a teenage girl suffocated beneath, Harry's query showed a serious vulnerability in the system. The law concentrated on protecting the accused while organized advocacy for victims was still years away. The uproar caused the movie to explode rather than fade. Dirty Harry grossed $28.1 million at the domestic box office and launched 4 sequels. People irritated by Vietnam, crime, music, and a sense of impotence saw something raw mirrored back at them. One line repeated throughout, often missed, about feeling lucky. Decades later, the meaning of the film was still being disputed. In 2012, exactly 41 years after its premiere, the Library of Congress admitted Dirty Harry to the National Film Registry. It was a clear and concise explanation. These movies weren't picked because they're flawless. They are picked because they reflect who Americans were at a moment in time. The same movie previously deemed fascist propaganda was now treasured as a cultural document. While all of that commotion surrounded Dirty Harry, Clint Eastwood was quietly constructing something else. In 1971, the same year the film made him a superstar, he directed his debut movie, Play Misty for Me. He shot it in Carmel, California, his hometown, and proved he could manage a story from behind the camera. The success provided him leverage. Throughout the 1970s, he performed and directed at the same time, going through films like High Plains Drifter in 1972, The Eiger Sanction in 1975, and The Outlaw Josie Wales in 1976. By directing himself, he stepped away from being merely a gunman and began investigating remorse, consequence, and moral weight. The cowboy image started to split open. Years later, that lengthy shift paid off. Unforgiven transformed everything at the 65th Academy Awards on March 29, 1993. The film won 4 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director, and Eastwood joined a select fraternity of performers who have directed themselves to a triumph. He was 62 years old. The movie made $159.2 million worldwide on a $14.40 $4 million budget and tore apart the cliches of the Western genre he once helped establish. He dedicated it to the guys who influenced his early career, Don Siegel and Sergio Leone. Even when he lost Best Music Actor to Al Pacino, the message was clear. Eastwood had rewritten his own legacy. He did it again with even greater vigor a decade later. On February 27, 2005, Million Dollar Baby dominated the 77th Academy Awards, winning Snorts, Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress, Music, and Best Supporting Actor. The $30 million film grossed $216.8 million globally and beat much fancied competition. Eastwood was everywhere: music, in the project, directing, producing, composing, and acting. When Snorts, he accepted music, Best Director, he was 74 years and 272 days old, making him the oldest person to win the prize at that time. It occurred 12 years after Unforgiven, confirming the former popularity was not a fluke. At an age when most directors slowed down, he was making his most emotionally difficult work. The manner he worked contributed to Snorts, how he continued to work. Eastwood became famous for shooting one take, occasionally two. Actors learned quickly to be ready. There wasn't much rehearsal or constant repetition. He thought that genuine dialogues, music, only occur once, not after 50 tries. The set stayed calm, budgets, music, stayed low, timelines stayed tight, the performances felt loose and human, not contrived. His method proved that restriction might increase creativity instead of limiting it. Away from the camera, his personal life was just as difficult. Clint Eastwood has at least 8 children with 6 different women between 1954 and 1996, with the oldest and youngest being 42 years apart. Several of those children were born while he was married to Maggie Johnson, his wife from 1953 to 1984. One daughter, Kimber, born on June 17, 1964, remained secret for 25 years until it surfaced publicly in July 1989. Despite having his name on the birth certificate, the truth remained hidden as his notoriety increased. During that long marriage, Eastwood lived openly as if he were single. He declared as early as 1963 that he meant to do as he pleased and described affairs as addicting. While Maggie Johnson suffered in silence, women passed through his life on studio lots and in acting schools. People around them saw the tension. Some described the marriage as open. Others described music, visible anguish. One affair with stuntwoman Roxanne Tunis began in 1959 and lasted roughly 14 years. It produced Kimber. The relationship played out publicly on sets while the marriage remained. Later came the stormy romance with Sandra Lockcatch, which lasted 13 years and resulted in a $70 million lawsuit filed on April 26, 1989. Locke accused Eastwood of betrayal, pressure, and manipulation. She later learned that during the latter years of their relationship, he had surreptitiously fathered 2 children with another woman. A $1.5 million directing agreement was used to settle the matter, but it was ultimately exposed in court as a scam. A jury quickly sided with Lockcatch before another deal concluded the matter. When Clint Eastwood entered the music industry in January 2009 at the age of 78, he quietly accomplished something that Hollywood had declared impossible. Snorts, Gran Torino started tiny, opening in just 84 cinemas, almost like a test. The first weekend brought in only $271,720, which seemed modest on paper. Then something shifted. Word spread. The picture blasted outward cinemas and quickly raked in $29 million in its wide opening weekend. That single sum erased his former personal record of $18.1 million from Space Cowboys. What made it even more remarkable was the size of the peril. Gran Torino cost only $33 million to make. By the time its run finished, it had grossed $269.9 million globally, more than 11 times its budget. Each theater averaged $10,337, giving Eastwood the greatest nationwide launch of his entire career as both actor and director. A simple story about an aged Korean War veteran and his Hmong neighbors had bonded well beyond expectations, and it proved that age had nothing to do with relevancy. That momentum carried into an even bigger cultural event a few years later. American Sniper didn't sneak into theaters when it debuted in January 2015. It surged through the door. In just its first 4 days, the picture grossed $105.3 million, the highest opening weekend ever recorded for a drama. With a budget of between $58 and $59 million, the global total by the end of its run was $547.7 million. Snorts, that gap made it the second most profitable picture of 2014, trailing only Transformers: Age of Extinction with an estimated profit of $243 million. It became the greatest grossing war movie ever, surpassing Saving Private Ryan, and only the 5th R-rated film to reach $500 million. 6 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, were given to Bradley Cooper for his performance as Navy SEAL Chris Kyle. At the same time, the picture generated backlash. During Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, filmmaker Michael Moore publicly attacked the movie, labeling snipers cowards, music, and decrying the rhetoric used toward Iraqis. Praise and fury combined, and the film became impossible to ignore. Just a few years before, Eastwood had already demonstrated he could dominate headlines without a movie at all. On August 30, 2012, at 82 years old, he came onto the platform at the Republican National Convention in Tampa, Florida, and delivered Music, a 12-minute speech that no one saw coming. Instead of a polished presentation, Music, he talked to an empty chair purported to represent President Barack Obama. Nearly 30 million people watched it live. The answer was quick and savage. Roger Ebert considered it, Music, dismal and depressing. Even Republican advisors discreetly regarded it as bizarre and weird. Eastwood did not back down. He later said he was, Music, aiming for folks in the middle, not trying to please anyone on the extremes. The best way to describe it was when Jon Stewart joked that the speech showed a version of Obama that only Republicans could see and that didn't resemble reality. The event turned much more bizarre a month later. In September 2012, Eastwood stated the empty chair was never intentional. He said that a stool had been sitting there. Someone kept asking Music if he wanted to sit, and the idea immediately came to him on the spot. He desired contrast. He wanted something unplanned in a room full of rehearsed words. He called it unorthodox, but stated the crowd was excited. His objective was easy. Place the chair there and discuss unfulfilled promises with Obama. Its mythology was enhanced by the fact that one of the decade's most talked about political moments resulted from sheer improvisation. Within hours, the response arrived from the White House. On August 31, 2012, President Obama's Twitter account uploaded Music, a photo of him sitting confidently at the cabinet table with 3 words underneath. This seat's taken. By Sunday afternoon, the tweet had been shared 51,400 times, becoming his second most retweeted post ever at that point. Only his May 2012 tweet advocating same-sex marriage had done better. With 61,500 retweets, the simplicity worked without fighting or attacking. The narrative was reversed by the picture, Music, which transformed mocking into a subdued display of power. Away, Music, from cameras and audiences, Eastwood's personal life was moving just as quietly. In 1986, he bought the Mission Ranch Hotel and Restaurant in Carmel by the Sea for roughly $5 million, preventing the 22-acre property from becoming condominiums. That same year, he served as mayor of Carmel, earning just $200 a month. Nearly 30 years later in 2014, he met Christina Sandera, Music, while she was working there as a waitress. Within months, she moved into his home. The two were initially pictured together in June 2014, exiting a Whole Foods in Brentwood, dubbed by tabloids as a mystery woman. His children met her early and liked her immediately, characterizing her as normal and grounded. By choice, the relationship remains secret. On February 22, 2015, they made their first public appearance at the Dolby Theater for the 87th Academy Awards. That evening, American Sniper was vying for 6 Oscars. Over the next few years, Sandera appeared beside Eastwood, Music, at select premieres, including Sully in 2016, The 1517 to Paris in 2018, and The Mule later that same year. Their final red carpet moment together happened in November 2019 at AFI Fest honoring Richard Jewell. She didn't try to disguise her age or reality, her gray hair was obvious as she walked behind him. Then they withdrew from public eye again. The quiet broke, Music, in the most excruciating way. Christina Sandera, Music, passed away unexpectedly at a hospital in Terry County, California, on July 18, 2024, 2 days after turning 61 on July 16. Eastwood, then 94, made a statement the same day calling her a kind, compassionate woman and, Music, said he would miss her very much. The cause of death was eventually determined to be cardiac arrhythmia, with atherosclerotic coronary artery disease playing a role. According to medical data, coronary artery disease accounts for over 73% of sudden cardiac fatalities and over 60% of cardiovascular deaths in adults over 35. The timing made the loss extra worse. A birthday had recently passed. A decade together ended without music warning. Months later, in January 2025, Eastwood's music son Scott reported his father was doing okay and hailed him a survivor. He remarked that resilience ran in the family. "You do not complain. You do not whine. You just do." That perspective comes from growing up during the Great Depression and living through World War II. By late 2024, sources suggested Eastwood had secretly initiated another relationship, though no identity was ever confirmed. Snort's even mourning did not totally stop his work. At 94, Eastwood directed Juror 2, his 42nd picture as director. The movie premiered at AFI Fest in October 2024 and astonished reviewers with a 92% new score on Rotten Tomatoes from 74 encircled 4 reviews and music, a Metacritic score of 73. Warner Brothers limited the release to fewer than 50 cinemas and never published domestic numbers. Yet the picture still generated $27.3 million overseas on a budget in the mid-30 million level. That accomplishment far exceeded Crime Macho from 2021, which made barely $16.5 million globally. Many critics deemed Juror 2 his strongest music work since American Sniper. Then bewilderment returned. In May 2025, just days before his 95th music birthday on May 31st, an Austrian newspaper published what looked to be an interview where Eastwood attacked modern Hollywood and stated he was preparing another picture. Large media outlets adopted it. Eastwood ended it on Snort's June 2, 2025, stating that he had not spoken to any journalists and that the entire interview was entirely fake. Nevertheless, fresh music reports appeared in January 2026. Industry insiders stated he was again in pre-production, cited on the Warner Brothers lot, silently, Snort's working. No title, no cast, just rumors. The majority of critics concur that Juror 2 would be a much better conclusion than Cry Machi if it were to be the last chapter. While it may not feel like a spectacular farewell, it proves that even at 94, Clint Eastwood could still make a smart, insightful film. After more than 7 decades in the profession, that alone feels like a concluding scene scripted completely on his own terms.